model like that, they talk about social class. But social class just disappeared. Just this word disappeared from the final report. Now, why is this important? Why do we have to speak on social class and not only on social position or social stratification issues? Why? In public health, because social stratification refers to the ranking of individuals along a continuum of economic, cultural attributes, simple gradational measures. This is important, yes, but not enough. Measures of social stratification are predictors of patterns of mortality. We have seen examples. But these measures do not reveal, and that's important, do not reveal the social mechanisms that explain. And in public health, we want to explain. Now, social class has more power because social class is defined, sociologically speaking, by relations of ownership or control over productive resources. So social class provides an explicit relational mechanism that explains how economic inequalities are generated. And this is not mainstream public health research, but slowly perhaps in the last year there have been a number of papers showing the links between social class, social stratification with health indicators and health inequalities, like for example this paper that my colleague Carlos Montaner has been the person who has not been able to come to attend this meeting. He has been one of the leaders in terms of research on this field. What about flexible, precarious employment? Well, we know that the situation in the last 20 years in many countries has gone worse. For example, like this guy, 2 jobs, no benefits. Right? Working poor. People work, but still are poor. And that relates to issues such as contracts. People who have contract, temporary employment, part-time work, but mainly temporary employment as an important issue that has been growing up in the last years. Together with temporary contract, we have job insecurity. Now, we have to understand from a more structural base this issue. For example, in the works of sociologist Pierre Bourdieu, when he talks about the causalization of employment as a part of a mode of domination. So this generalized, permanent state of insecurity that aim to many workers to submission or to accept exploitation. And Pierre Bourdieu said that to characterize this mode of domination, he talks about a new word that he called flexploitation, flexibility and exploitation. In our own research, in our own group, we have conducted studies on precarious employment for more than a decade, showing, for example, for qualitative studies, issues such as this, the permanent availability. You can sleep while you wait for a call. It hurts a lot not being able to fulfill the promises to your children. You are upset while thinking whether they are going to call you. Or, for example, discrimination, like humiliation, right? It's humiliating, they treat you like trash. You get sick, you get home burnout, and so on. Or, for example, the issues of vulnerability and lack of power. We keep quiet because we are afraid. These issues are important in public health because, as I said, we need to understand that precarious employment is much more than job insecurity, is much more than having a temporary contract. So, precarious employment is a continuum that goes from the standard social security to a high degree of precariousness. And what is this precariousness? Precariousness is a multi-dimensional construct made of a number of dimensions. Lack of contract or temporal contract, but also vulnerability, also level of wages, also rights, but the capacity to execute these rights. I'm going to put an example of a new PhD dissertation that a colleague, a student of mine, is going to defend in a couple of weeks, few weeks from now. It's not published yet. And this shows, according to this new way of measuring precarious employment, what's going on in terms of health inequalities. For example, if you are a man, a professional, or not manual, a Spaniard, and more than 30, 20% precarious. 20% precarious. Now, if you are a woman, manual job, immigrant, young, 90% precariousness. So it's a huge difference, and that's a different thing than, as I said, to understand temporary contracts or job insecurity. And of course, this relates very much with health and with mental health, as the same PhD dissertation shows. The higher your precariousness, the worse is your health. Two more issues that the report do not cover very well, did not cover very well. One is the lack of an historical perspective. This WHO report do not introduce well enough, that's my point of view, some historical perspectives. And in public health, we need to understand that. We need to understand. I'm going to illustrate this point just with one example. With the example of life expectancy in the European Union and the ex-USSR, Russia, showing that in the 90s, there was a decrease. If we take, pensions, unemployment benefits, job protection, income distribution, job training, there are at least 3 or 4 big models of countries that accomplish more or less these type of conditions. Again, social policies, labor market things matter and matter a lot. Now, for example, in terms of key indicators to understand that, like union density, collective bargaining, you see that there are clusters, number of countries that cluster, gather, group together in terms of their own characteristics. And in the world, we have tried to do the same with all the countries in the world. It took us 3 years to do all these studies, right? So, for example, in the world, we took to take account of the informal economy together with the formal sector. Finally, we came up with a group, with a typology of countries, starting with the wealthiest, the core, periphery, more equal, more unequal, and all the countries of the world classified here according to the more or less government regulation. This macro perspective allows us to, that's the map of the world with the typology of these countries, and there is a clear link between this picture and healthy life expectancy, So here you have the core countries, but also the labor market differences, medium, periphery, semi-periphery, with also gradients in terms of healthy life expectancy. Now I'm going to go a little bit quicker because it's kind of late, we started very late. So I'm going to put some examples of the employment and working conditions at the world level. So for example, we could talk about unemployment, more than 200 people unemployed. With this year, with the economic crisis, unemployment keeps going up, of course. Sometimes very difficult to study, and this is an example to illustrate this point. The issue of imprisonment in the US. For the last 20, 30 years, incarceration, imprisonment in the United States has increased dramatically. Who are in jail? Who are in jail, in prison? Basically, black people, basically black young people. Sometimes, like this map shows, more than 50% of young black people are in jail. More than 50% are in jail in these red areas. That means that they are not unemployed, they are in jail. You know? They are not unemployed, they are in jail. That's why sometimes it's so hard, so difficult to really study the situation of unemployment. We have, of course, issues of working poor, 1,400 million people. I'm going to skip this. Many cases, many examples. I'm going to skip this. Maquilas, Central America, problems, people working for long hours, very poor conditions, enterprises free of syndicalism, informal employment, very difficult to study, huge variability of situations in the world. I'm going to skip that for the purpose of time. Many examples, for example, ship breakers. I know here close to the city there is an example of ship breaking. This is a case in Bangladesh and in India with very, very poor conditions, very, very poor conditions, and people tend to suffer, for example, after some years of cancer and breathing and taking many of the pollutants that are together with this task. Child labor, more than 300 million people, mainly in India, mainly in Africa, very poor conditions, but also slavery and forced labor. Between 12 and 28 million people slaves today. According to Kevin Bales, slaves today are disposable. You use it, you throw away your slave. There are more slaves today than all the people stolen from Africa in the time of the transatlantic slave trade. So that's an important issue that sometimes is very hidden. For example, the issue of cocoa. Cocoa in child labor, mainly in Ivory Coast. This dot here accumulates 40% of cocoa production to then make chocolate. Chocolate that big companies make in Germany, in Switzerland, in France, etc. Who make this cocoa? Who collect this cocoa? Basically, child labor. Well, we have also in the book introduced many issues on psychosocial factors, very well known for many of you probably in occupational health. I'm going to skip that. Also with some cases which are very extreme, the known case of karoshi in Japan, people who die from overwork, You spend hours and hours and hours at your work and finally you die from a cardiovascular or cerebrovascular problem. And also there is action. People and movements and